It tracks you. It tracks information about your behavior and where you go in the world. Now, it turns out that a company is selling that information to police such that they can surveil millions of Americans in their most intimate habits, and they can do it without a warrant.
So we're talking about a mass volume of data that is incredibly detailed and can give law enforcement an idea of anyone who is in a particular area, as well as retrace your steps back and basically reconstruct your entire life.
You might expect that the Fourth Amendment's constitutional protection for us when it comes to illegal search and seizure would apply in this case, but it does not. There is no federal regulation when it comes to online privacy.
Cambridge Analytica used the Facebook data of more than 80 million Americans to analyze the best ways of manipulating American voters.
One of the things that Chris Wiley said when he broke this story with The Guardian back in 2018 is he said, we knew so much about so many individuals that we could understand their inner demons. And we could figure out how to target those demons, how to target their fear, how to target their anger, how to target their paranoia. And with those targets, we could trigger those emotions. And by triggering those emotions, we could then manipulate them into clicking on a website, joining a group, telling them what kind of things to read, telling them what kind of people to hang out with, even telling them who to vote for.
In a world where technology is advancing at an unprecedented pace, the pervasive presence of surveillance has become a stark reality. From bustling city streets to the quiet corners of our homes, our every move is being captured, monitored, and analyzed. Though considerable effort is given to disguising this data collection and surveillance, with close attention, you can already see the effects of this on our society. I think what scares me the most is that we're all very comfortable with how things are right now. Maybe we're worried about what might be done with all of this data in the future, but no one realizes how it is being used to manipulate us and affect our lives right now. My goal is to help you understand the risks that this technology poses in order to help you make decisions to minimize their impact on your life. First, we need to understand what surveillance capitalism is. I will say that it has very little to do with actual capitalism, which revolves around voluntary value-for-value exchange, because so much of this data is collected without our knowledge or without our explicit consent that I wouldn't call it voluntary. So I think this term might be slightly misleading. Surveillance capitalism is the monetization of data captured through monitoring your movements and behavior, not only online but in the physical world as well. This includes your Google searches, Facebook likes, location data, shopping preferences, device information, social media activity, app usage, biometric data, sensor data, and communication data. I mean, that's everything that we do. They are collecting so much data that our behavior becomes predictive to them. And then they go and package our data and sell it on what Professor Zuboff describes as a new behavioral futures market.
Surveillance capitalism has claimed something from outside the market and brought it into the market to sell and buy. But in this case, the territory that it has claimed is private human experience. Private human experience has been claimed for the marketplace to be sold and purchased as behavioral data. And more specifically, the way this works is that our experience is claimed unilaterally for the taking. Our experience is rendered as behavioral data by the takers. Those behavioral data are then combined with very sophisticated machine intelligence capabilities. The outcome of the computation and behavioral data, the outcome is what I call a prediction product. These are computational predictions of what we will do now, soon, and later. Those predictions are then sold into a new kind of marketplace. What is this marketplace trading in? It's trading in bets on our future behavior. I call it a behavioral futures marketplace. So these prediction products are like futures derivatives, but in this case, they're derivatives of our behavior.
Professor Zuboff really is the foremost expert on surveillance capitalism, and she lays that out really well. By the way, if you haven't watched her videos in their entirety, I'll leave the links in the description. They're extremely eye-opening and thought-provoking. In her book, she goes on to talk about how the lines between surveillance capitalism, mass surveillance, and government use of this data are starting to blur, and this to me is the most worrisome part. If we forfeit our data of our own accord in exchange for entertainment or some other trifles, that's one thing. We always have the option to stop doing that. But when governments start embracing this, then we have cause for concern because whereas corporations need our voluntary involvement, governments can mandate it by force. Perhaps the best example of this being taken to an extreme is the Chinese treatment of the Uyghur people. The Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic group numbering some 13.5 million, an estimated 11.8 million of which occupy the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Zone in China. Since the mid-2010s, they have been heavily persecuted by the Chinese government and kept under constant surveillance in order to, according to the Chinese Communist Party, combat terrorism and provide vocational training. This is part of their People's War on Terror declared in 2014. According to experts, as many as 1 million of the Uyghurs are condemned to internment camps, generally without trial or charges, though some of them earn their way in through terrible, heinous crimes such as growing a beard, wearing a burqa, or quitting smoking. Since the Chinese Communist Party chooses to see this as possibly conforming to Uyghur religious practices. Many Uyghurs who avoid the internment camps have their homes force-occupied by party officials to report on their activities while they are all subject to surveillance. Surveillance is particularly stringent for individuals who conform to one of 36 person types, including people who do not use a mobile phone, those who consume unusual amounts of electricity, those who use the back door instead of the front, and those who socialize too little, or those who are judged to be insufficiently loyal. I am not kidding. Now, this is an extreme case, but please tell me you see the similarities between this and surveillance capitalism in the West. Our homes are not force-occupied. No, our homes are voluntarily monitored by Alexa or Google Nest, or by our smartphones in the absence of those. Our movements are tracked not by CCTVs, but by satellites triangulating the device that never leaves our side. We do not have internment camps, but we have seen what happens to those of status or influence when they speak in a manner incompatible with the prevailing narrative or social flow. They are canceled. They lose their jobs, their livelihoods. They are informally cast out or segregated from the system as punishment for not bowing to social norms that have just recently been thrust on all of us. Jordan Peterson is a good example of this because not only did Twitter ban him, you can think what you want about a private company banning individuals from their platform for violating their rules. But here an uninvolved third party, the College of Psychologists of Ontario, became voluntarily involved, threatening to take his license, drastically increasing the consequences of speech solely for political reasons. So here we see multiple establishment entities colluding against one individual. I would say this is a bad precedent to set, but this is not the first time. There are many other victims of these sort of tactics. Peter Flaming, Gina Carano, Ryan Anderson, David Flynn, Scott Cawthon, John Gibson, Kate Harson. The list goes on. The intent here is clear. Make examples of these people to make you second guess what you say, or ultimately, to keep any dissenting views or opinions silent. With this much political and social pressure coming from the establishment, it becomes very difficult to push back. The internment camps are completely unnecessary. In fact, all they do is make ill intentions and atrocious actions very obvious. The silent, invisible methods of surveillance capitalism are much better, and by that I mean much more dangerous, because there is nothing obvious to point at and say, this is wrong. All of these subversive data collecting happens behind the scenes, obscured from the watchful eye of consumers, watchdogs, and legislators. In this environment, the owners of our data, and our experiences do as they please, while we are relegated to operating within the framework of socially acceptable actions that they have constructed. They are the rulers, we are merely the subjects. Take a look at this. This is a Panopticon. The architectural concept involves a central structure for observation surrounded by cells or partitions fully exposed to the central observer. It aims at creating the ever-present feeling of being watched to encourage the worker or prisoner to police themselves for fear of punishment. This enables a large number of people to be held in check with minimal manpower, resources, or effort. This concept has been used throughout recent history. The Millbank prison in Britain operated from 1816 to 1890. It was rumored to have caused significant mental health problems among prisoners, though this was not a contributing cause to the closure. The Stateville Correctional Facility has operated here in the United States since 1925. Its Panoptic Wing, F-House, the last remaining so-called roundhouse in the US, was closed in 2016. The most interesting implementation was the Presidio Modelo Rehabilitative Prison in Cuba. Inside, prisoners were allowed to roam freely and participate in workshops to learn trades or improve literacy. Unfortunately, due to overcrowdedness, corruption, cruelty, or lack of care, I'm not sure, the experiment ended in failure in 1967. Our penal system seems to have moved away from the Panopticon concept, but when it was seen in use, a Frenchman by the name of Paul-Michel Foucault saw the threats posed by this instrument and dedicated part of a book to it in 1975. The book was titled Discipline and Punish. I'd like to read you an excerpt on Panopticism where he perfectly explains the potential of this concept in a way that has become more relevant with time. Hence the major effect of the Panopticon, to induce in the inmate a state of conscious and permanent visibility that ensures the automatic functioning of power. So to arrange things that the surveillance is permanent in its effects, even if it is discontinuous in its action. That the perfection of power should tend to render its actual exercise unnecessary. That this architectural apparatus should be a machine for creating and sustaining a power relation independent of the person who exercises it. In short, that the inmates should be caught up in a power situation of which they are themselves the bearers. Panopticon was also a laboratory. It could be used as a machine to carry out experiments, to alter behavior, and to train or correct individuals. To experiment with medicines and monitor their effects. To try out different punishments on prisoners, according to their crimes and character, and to seek the most effective ones. To teach different techniques simultaneously to the workers, to decide which is the best. To try out pedagogical experiments, and in particular, to take up once again the well-debated problem of secluded education by using orphans. One would see what would happen when, in their 16th or 18th year, they were presented with other boys or girls. One could verify whether, as Helvetius thought, anyone could learn anything. One would follow the genealogy of every observable idea. One could bring up different children according to different systems of thought, making certain children believe that 2 and 2 do not make 4, or that the moon is made of cheese, then put them together when they are 20 or 25 years old. One would then have discussions that would be worth a great deal more than the sermons or lectures on which so much money is spent. One would have at least an opportunity of making discoveries in the domain of metaphysics. The Panopticon is a privileged place for experiments on men, and for analyzing with complete certainty the transformations that may be obtained from them. But the Panopticon must not be understood as a dream building. It is the diagram of a mechanism of power reduced to its ideal form. Its functioning, abstracted from any obstacle, resistance, or friction, must be represented as a pure architectural and optical system. It is, in fact, a figure of political technology that may and must be detached from any specific use. So, to sort of summarize and deconstruct his words, Panopticon is not just a structure made of metal, concrete, and wood. It has transcended the physical world and emerged as a concept, a political technology, as he called it. And that technology is defining the world today in a way that threatens democracy as we know it. When enough of our data is collected and weaponized to make our actions predictive and our self-determination yielding, democracy dies. The will of the people is replaced by the will of the 1% of the 1% who control this political technology. This is, in my opinion, the worst case outcome of this technology, and it is primarily what I would like to see us avoid. But individual action is necessary to ensure that the worst possible outcome does not become the outcome. You don't have to do anything extreme, just make some small adjustments. Start with limiting your online footprint. Minimize the ways in which your biometric data can be collected and monetized. This includes avoiding things like Alexa at all costs, using older cell phones without biometric technology, and avoiding so-called smart technology in general. More importantly, it is important to build a life for yourself in which you maximize your independence and minimize your reliance on the system. For me, this has meant moving semi-off-grid, starting a garden, raising chickens, and learning how to forage. It also means minimizing the resources you consume on a regular basis and simplifying your overall lifestyle. Under the simplified life model, you'll discover that more of your efforts go towards enriching your own life and achieving your goals, and less is diverted toward enriching those at the top of the pyramid. If you are able to make these changes, I assure you, you will be well positioned for any scenario that we may face together as our society continues to evolve. Thank you for watching.